Hey, welcome to Dealer Confidential. This is our first broadcast. I'm excited to be with Greg today. We've got an interesting subject, that is confidentiality, and can't wait to get started, Greg. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Hal. Very exciting topic. This is a topic that I think a lot of both selling dealers and buying dealers do not think much about because they get so caught up in, hey, I'm going to sell my dealership or I'm going to buy a dealership. They forget the small little nuances like what we're going to be discussing today, confidentiality, that could absolutely destroy a deal one way or another. So that's why today's podcast is so important, I think, to new dealers, dealers who have been around wanting to sell their dealerships, and maybe guys just want to learn a little bit more about franchise and franchise law.
Yeah, it's great. You know, the question always comes up, well, how are you going to sell my business without telling anybody? Well, I mean, there are some, that's a very good question, but there's some good answers to do that. And up front, let's talk about the stakeholders around confidentiality. It's not just buyers that we want to be concerned with, at least on the sell side. Greg's the expert on the buy side. It's not just buyers, it's the employees at the store. You certainly don't want the employees finding out before it's time. You certainly don't want customers finding out before the time. And also, you don't want suppliers or your OEM partner finding out before time. So there's a right and a wrong time to do everything, and confidentiality in a business sale is best protected until the buyer and the seller have a strategy in place and some messaging in place to roll it out. So let's get into it, Greg.
And Hal, what you brought up, we will touch all of those points that Hal just mentioned. The how to handle employees, how to handle vendors, those are all excellent points. And a lot of them we don't even think about because they're daily practice. You just make the assumption, but absolutely important to confidentiality.
Yeah, and here's the headline. You don't want to damage the business while it's being marketed and sold. What do I mean by damage the business? Employees find out that the business is for sale, they could leave. Right now, change is always, it's always there. You don't want to upset the apple cart and the momentum of the business by having key employees leave or having key employees distracted by the sale. You want to keep them focused on the business, keep them producing so that the bottom line of the business is not impacted. You don't want the buyer to know about the business until you qualify the buyer. Now, Greg will talk to you about the buyers. We go through a three-pronged process to make sure that we've got the right buyer or a qualified buyer before they get too far into the sale. So I'll talk about that in a minute. But suppliers, you don't want them knowing because there's price discounts, there's long-term relationships, and suppliers tend to chat with other suppliers and with the OEM partner. And the OEM partner managing that quietly is, look, I was at Ford Motor Company for 30 years. There are no secrets in the OEM. Greg will tell you that as well. Once somebody knows something in the OEM, it will quickly spread. So mum is the word, so to speak, on confidentiality for all those stakeholders.
You know, Hal, I just thought of one thing. So many times a selling dealer, and again, this is your area, will go to the OEM first. It sounds like a logical step. Absolutely not a logical step. And Hal and I will be discussing that and probably even today in under confidentiality. But the steps that a selling dealer thinks are logical, take a deep breath, step back for half a second and say, is this really something I should be doing? Maybe I should talk to Hal, maybe I should talk to Greg, maybe I should talk to our attorneys before I do X, Y, and Z. So yeah, let's begin. Hal, what is the most important thing a buying or selling dealer needs to do first?
Well, I mean, deploy a three-step or three-pronged process. I'll develop a teaser ad or a teaser executive summary. This summary tells the potential prospect about the offering. We'll give some financials, some high-level financials. We'll give an indication of the size of the business, the number of employees, how long the business has been in operation. It will hint at the geography, not too specific. I won't say Chicago, Illinois. I may say Midwest. I may say Great Lakes region. I may say something that will point an individual to that specific geography, but not the specific location, and certainly not the name. So I'll put that teaser out and it'll go into the marketplace. It'll go into the automotive news. It'll go into industry publications. It'll go sometimes into Biz Buy Sell and other business for sale websites. I will then get an email or a phone call, and that'll start the process for an NDA, a non disclosure agreement, NDA for short. And that is basically a commitment on the part of the buyer to protect the sensitive data that will be given to him or her after they sign on the dotted line. It will also, in that NDA, it will also ask a question about whether they're a competitor. Now they don't know that they're a direct competitor, but um, if they're already in that category, if they're already operating another store, then that will put us on another level of sensitivity with respect to data, because we don't want to. This competition will use can and will use this sale against us, right? So if a competitor knows that a business is for sale, a dealership down the road is for sale, they may not be interested in buying the store, but when customers come into their lot, they could say, "Hey, you don't want to buy from ABC
Right.
Motors. Didn't you hear that they're for sale?"
Yeah.
So the NDA is really important. It's the first prong of a three-pronged process that I use. And you're familiar with those, right, Greg?
Yeah, the one that I'm more familiar with, and again, it goes both ways, is a mutual non-disclosure. Now, from a definition standpoint, a mutual means that both parties agree not to disclose sensitive materials under any circumstances without authorization and without predetermine what it's going to be, what information is going to be exchanged. So, mutual NDA is one that basically commits both groups, buyer and seller, to play by a set of rules.
Yeah.
Very, very simple. A regular NDA, sometimes it's sided towards either the buyer or the seller. So either one is fine, but again, the wording in it has to be very, very careful. We spent Hal, years developing the proper NDAs with our legal teams. It could make or break a deal within minutes if the NDA is not correct or doesn't have the proper verbiage and wording and tenses and everything else. And you may say to us, hey, well, it's only, it's a one-page non-disclosure. How difficult could it be? It could be real difficult,
Yeah.
especially if the two parties, buyer and seller, go down a path of not mutual respect. It can get a little dirty. So we really have to be careful with the NDAs or the mutual NDAs. And we have to make sure ours come from our attorneys. But when we do a deal, whether a buyer or seller, we always say, hey, do you have an automotive attorney? And number two, do you need an automotive attorney? Because we have a number of them, the best in the country, and we will recommend them. And if you have one already, then we'll gladly work with them, as long as we understand that they're automotive attorneys and just not your accountant types or family lawyers or trust funds or whatever.
Yeah.
This is a very, very, very delicate and precise business, the buying or selling of a franchise. It's very complicated. You're buying sometimes a property. Sometimes you're buying the franchise alone. Some of these deals are, 25, 30, easily $50 million, some of them. And of course, there's lesser ones. So make sure all the dots are dotted and the T's are crossed.
You bring up two excellent points. The mutualness of the NDA is actually really important. Everybody thinks of, oh, we got to protect the seller and the seller's sensitive data. Well, that goes with the buyer too. The buyer's actually going to put financial, uh, you know, criteria in the buyer profile. We'll get to that in a minute. Mutual. I like the mutual NDA. I think it's a two-way street, because we're going to be sharing confidential information about the business, but the buyer's also going to be sharing confidential information about his or her personal assets that will be deployed to purchase the business. So mutual is absolutely the better of the two. I use both. The other point that Greg made that's worth mentioning here is automotive attorney. Now, look, we both know we've done deals when other attorneys that are not familiar with the jargon and the conventions of automotive, and it makes it doubly difficult to put a deal together when you have an attorney that's never heard about holdback or doesn't know about the incentives that the manufacturer pays, the warranty receivables, the work in process, the treatment of customer deposits. There's so many little gears that turn the medium-sized gears that turn the big gears in a deal. And without having an automotive attorney in tow here, it makes it doubly difficult. So Greg raises a good point about that.
Yeah, I just thought of something else, which I think is very interesting and really, really important to bring up at this time. In any of these automotive deals, I should say, you usually have two separate deals within the one deal. One deal is for potential real estate, and that real estate is either a buy sell or a lease, whatever it might be. But so you have the real estate aspect of the franchise agreement and or the buy sell over here. Then you actually have the franchise agreement where you are willing and or want to buy the franchise rights from a franchise dealer. So you have two things going on at the same time. So even though we all agree that you need an automotive dealer, I should say an automotive deal lawyer, attorney, you also need that automotive attorney to have extensive experience in real estate and real estate purchase and buys and
Yeah.
sells, mortgages, whether the real estate is in a trust fund, how to handle all these things. There are things that, Hal, you and I both know. We sit down with our dealers, we sit down with prospects, we start bringing up some of these things, and they are the deer in the headlights. They just stare at you and say, "What? What are you talking about?" So that's why it's important, as Hal just mentioned, that we make sure we assemble a team for each individual dealer and buyer and seller. And that team really understands not only what we're hoping to accomplish, but understands both the position of the seller and the position of the buyer. And that's a question you say, well, why does my attorney, if I'm the buyer, need to understand the position of the seller? Well, that's what makes a deal.
Yeah. Yeah, no question. Good points. So let's get back to confidentiality and this three pronged. So we mentioned NDA, very important, and the attorneys that stand behind that. The second is a buyer profile. Now, this can get a little bit tricky. As a sell side advisor, I'm going to want to know a little bit more about the buyer before I release access to the data room, which will include financial statements, pictures of the facility, really everything that the buyer needs to know about the deal, maybe outside of the tax returns. But the buyer profile will start to ask some questions about the history of the buyer. Is he already in the business? Is he a first time automotive buyer? And also importantly, start to ask the questions about what kind of capital that he or she needs to invest. Now, this is important because we don't want to waste anyone's time. And we know that we've gotten the business pre-qualified. So we know what the bank's going to be looking for at this point in the offering. And I like to use the bank's number as a kind of starting point. But as Greg will tell you and knows real well, that's just the starting point. You have to have the capital by the business, but you also have to have the capital to meet the OEM working capital and operating investment requirements. And that's normally a debt to equity ratio of 1-to-1. So you can borrow half of it, but you got to come with equity on the other half, unencumbered equity, non-borrowed equity. So we're not trying to be obstructive. We're not trying to hassle the buyer. But as a sell side, we want to know directionally what kind of money is available to invest so as to not waste their time on a business that may be financially out of reach.
Right.
Some buyers get a little hot. I'll be honest here. Some get pretty hot that I've asked that question, but again, I'm trying to do the job for the seller, protect the seller in terms of making sure that the materials go out to financially qualified buyers. So that's kind of step number 2 of the process.
Yeah. Now, just along with that, either the buyer or the seller have to trust us and our attorneys. How many times, Hal, I think you just mentioned it, how many times does the buyer say, well, I don't want to disclose that information? That's a family trust. That's this, that's that, whatever. It's we recently had a dealer that had a ton of money in cryptocurrency. And he did not want that to show in the confidentiality statement and the statement showing his ability to purchase. So here we're going back to confidentiality, saying, hey, if you want us to represent you, you need to be honest with us. You need to feel that there's total transparency, not only between your experience, but more importantly, like Hal said, the 1-to-1 ratio. Are you capable of buying this franchise? And we will put you through somewhat of a test to make sure that you are, because I don't want to waste my time. Hal, you don't want to waste your time. And the last thing we want to do is upset a potential seller of a multi-million dollar franchise because we just brought someone who's not qualified to the table.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
at times, this confidentiality agreement is going to turn into a very, very detailed, even though it's usually one page to start. But once we get into it, we start talking about funding and financing and properties and, what your rent roll is on your current building, all that other wonderful stuff, it's confidential. It stays with us. It doesn't go anywhere. It may go, of course, to our lawyers, and it will probably go to our banking sources, but that's it. Some of this isn't even shared, as Hal knows, isn't even shared with the buyer. I should say the seller. Some of this buyer information is kept with us until we actually sit down. And again, that's probably podcast number 2 or 3, and that's the letter of intent. So we're not
Yeah.
there today. We're
Yeah.
not even going to talk about that today.
Right. Right. No, so excellent. NDA, financial qualification, and then operational qualification, right? And this is just look, the OEMs are they have the franchise, they use the transaction as a leverage point, and they're looking for certain things from the dealer candidate, the prospect, in order to approve them. So if you've got the money and you like the deal, but you don't have the right operating experience, what is the right operating experience? Well, they look at 3 things. They look at sales effectiveness or market share in easier to understand terms. What kind of experience do you have at your present store? Typically a dealer or a general manager, because they want the prospect to have had oversight, new, used, parts, service, F&I, rental, the whole profit centers of the dealership. They want that. They want effective sales of market share. They want a good, clean CSI record, customer satisfaction record, and they're looking for a store that has maintained a minimum level of working capital. So those are the 3 biggies. There's also something called character. So this is an important intangible, but do you have a reputation in the business community as being straightforward, and are you respected? If there's a felony on your record, you can pretty much kiss a dealership goodbye. They just will not bend on that one. So we are now we've gotten past the money. We're okay with the money. Now we're looking at the operating, credentials. And you might say, well, why are you doing that? Because the franchise is going to do that anyway. The point is, we don't want to even get to the franchise without filtering and positioning us, because there's some things that we can put together. If you're short of those things, we might want to bring in a general manager that can get your deal approved, but we've got to know where we stand operationally to be able to push the right buttons so that when we package a deal, it goes to the OEM and gets approved.
Yeah, and I think what we're hearing a lot of nowadays is that we have a lot of independents who are looking to become franchise OEM dealers. And their biggest question or their biggest statement is, why not? How come I can't become an OEM dealer? And how you just brought up a couple of points. Manufacturers want to assure their success in their franchise, especially in whatever city that franchise is in. So they want to make sure that we present them with the best candidate. And as Hal mentioned, does the candidate have the right credentials for, number one, this franchise? But more importantly, which we didn't talk about yet, is not only the franchise, but the location of the franchise. If we're talking about a major metro, then all of a sudden, I should say, the specifications, the desires, the demands of the OEM become greater because they realize that this is one of their jewels. Let's say it's in Chicago or New York Metro or whatever, and they're going to be very careful in putting in the right person. Now, that may not be the same for Boise, Idaho. You may have a completely different set of guidelines from an OEM for that location. So this is the kind of stuff that we really sit down with. Again, while Hal mentioned, while we're doing the confidentiality report and starting to do the financial analysis of the potential dealer feasibility. That's basically what it is. We do a feasibility study as to whether we think this guy or woman or man, whatever, is going to be able to satisfy the OEM's needs, satisfy the franchise needs, and more importantly, which sounds kind of crazy, is he going to be able to meet what the state, the town, all the other things that we have to get approvals from, licensing, sales tax licenses, motor vehicle license, is he going to be able to get all those? So these are all questions that come up when we deal with that so simple NDA.
Yeah.
It starts it all, Hal, and it could end it
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. I joke often. I say, the OEM wants the money of Warren Buffett and the automotive resume of Lee Iacocca and wants them to go to the middle of Iowa, right? I mean, it's sometimes we talk to a lot of people who could be great dealers, but they just don't have that background and they're unwilling to partner with somebody that will get them the store. So those are the 3 points. You got the NDA, you got the financial, and you got the operational. And once those boxes get checked off, then I send what's called the confidential information memorandum out, or dealer prospectus, business prospectus, and it tells the story of the dealership, how long it's been around, where it is. It goes through the management team. There's a generally an org structure in there. It talks about the Google reviews and the social media report card. It goes through, of course, all the financials, the ad backs, and importantly, it rationalizes the asking price, or it should rationalize the asking price, at least the starting asking price, and puts it all in a, I don't know, a 30, 40, 50 page document that is the sell package, if you will, for the prospect. So once we get to that point, then the ball's in the prospect's court, and the buyer broker, which is Greg in this case, and Greg and the buyer will pour over the numbers. Generally, they'll ask me a bunch of questions because you can't include everything in the SIM, and the confidential information memorandum, CIM for short. If you ever hear CIM, send the CIM. It's from somebody that's knowledgeable about that document that I just described, which is the kind of the holy grail of the business offering.
Hey, Hal, we got about 5 minutes left in today's podcast.
Yeah.
I know we have a couple of questions that some of our potential dealers and existing dealers have sent in to us. So maybe we could address a couple of them for the next 5 minutes or so.
Sure.
The first one is, and I think you brought it up a while ago, and a dealer who is interested in buying a store. He says that and I believe him, he says that he's an existing OEM, and he's concerned about his employees finding out that he wants to buy another store in the same general vicinity, and how that will affect his current employees, and when should he let his management team know that he's potentially looking for a franchise. And again, this falls under the confidentiality, because maybe this potential buyer is bound by the confidentiality where he can't talk to anyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think the deal will get to a certain point, typically after the franchise or the OEM has approved it, and you're in the kind of the final stages of dotting the I's and crossing the T's. Obviously, it needs to have a mutual discussion between buyer and seller, because once it gets out into one organization, it's on the street and likely to get back to the other. So you want to sit down and have a coordinated and effective communication strategy, the messaging, and also the timing of the messaging. Typically, it's really done close to closing or shortly thereafter closing, because again, if it's too early, something might happen with the deal, and then the word is out, and that's not a good thing.
Yeah, the last thing you want to do, whereas the buying dealer wants to, is to lose some of his key personnel prior to the deal going through.
Yeah, I'll share a quick story. It got out early in one of my offerings, and we had to basically, I got with the dealer quickly, and I said, okay, here's, it's unfortunate. The attorney sent an email that was picked up by the office manager who had access to the dealer's email. That's another safeguard that we should talk about. But the word got out into the dealership, and I called the dealer immediately. They had a meeting with their key managers. Not everybody, but their 5 key managers came in. The dealer was an elderly gentleman, and basically I said, look, tell them that you're not going to live forever, and it's time that you're going to move on. You've hired a broker. We're going to find a buyer that similar core values and cares about you like I have cared about you, and tell them that it's in their best interest to keep doing their job and to keep this information under wraps, and then go out to your teams, because it's going to get out, and just have confidential, trusted meetings. We in short, we've turned a negative into a positive, because we rallied everybody around and made them feel part of the sale. We didn't want them to be a part of the sale, but once the word got out, we made them part of the sale. They locked arms. I think we had a kind of a circle of trust, if you will, and we were able to manage through the sale and get to the other side
Well,
without a lot of damage.
there's another question that I see here, and you hit it right on the head. You're probably reading my mind. One potential dealer wants to know if he should have, even though it would be a little bit of a red light, if he should have his senior, he says senior management team sign NDAs.
I don't think so. I think that will set off some alarm bells that
Right.
something's going on in the
Agreed.
background. I do think that there's a circle of trust, obviously CPAs, attorneys, wealth advisors, the office manager or the controller or the business manager, whatever you want to call it in the dealership, will eventually need to be brought into this circle because during due diligence, as Greg knows, there's just a ton of information that the dealer won't have very good access to. And so at some point
Right.
during due diligence, the dealer will need to call the office manager in and bring him or her into the circle of trust.
Yep. Okay.
But
We're just about finished.
I wouldn't fire off blasting messages by saying, "Hey, you got to sign an NDA." They'll know something's up.
Yeah, or I'll know something's up with the dealer if he potentially needs to have NDAs with his employees. That's kind of a red
Yeah.
flag for me.
Yeah, no,
Okay,
exactly.
couple of seconds left for us. Two things. What are we talking about next week?
The next podcast, I think, is on preparing the dealership for sale. Looking forward to that. There's some areas that you need to housekeep and get ready. Sometimes events happen, like partners that want out, or divorces, or medical situations that arise. So you really want to have your house in order before you list a business for sale. We'll be going through some of that on the next podcast.
That's one of my favorite topics. Thanks, Al. It's a great start to our podcast. We'll be recording these weekly, and we'll be sending out notifications through LinkedIn and through all our other means to notify people that the podcast is up and ready. And in the next couple of weeks, we'll also be starting our live podcast, our Zoom calls, where we will have special guests who come in after we get more or less settled in some of the details first of what the deals, buy-sell deals look like. And then we'll have our attorneys come in, we'll have our accountants come in live shows that our prospective clients could ask the right questions or the wrong questions. We'll deal with all of that. So that's it for tonight, Hal.
Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it. Look forward to the next one.
Yep,
all right.
Look forward to it. Thanks, everybody.
Take care. You got it.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.